Welcome to our channel. Today we're delving into the glamorous yet complex life of Eva Gabor, the beloved actress and socialite who charmed audiences in Green Acres and became a symbol of mid-century Hollywood elegance. From her dramatic beginnings in Budapest to her rise as one of America's first modern celebrities, Eva's story is filled with triumphs, heartbreaks, and fascinating anecdotes. Join us as we explore the life, loves, and legacy of this unforgettable star. Eva was that quintessential mid-century Hollywood starlet, a woman who seemed from the outside to have it all: fame, wealth, impeccable style, a cutting sense of humor, and an accent that millions could pick out in seconds. She was born in Budapest in 1919, the youngest of three sisters, to parents Jolie and Vilmos Gabor. They were of Hungarian Jewish heritage, living in a country that would become increasingly hostile in the years leading up to World War II. Alongside older sisters Magda and Jaja, Eva was soon swept into her mother's potent dreams of showbiz glory. Jolie Gabor had once nurtured the idea of becoming a famous entertainer herself, and when that ship seemed to sail, she poured every ounce of that thwarted ambition into her daughters. It was not enough that they be merely gorgeous or well-dressed. They had to be the most radiant, the most stylish, the most everything. And while each sister developed her own distinctive spark, it was Eva who carried a unique warmth and comedic flair that Americans would fall in love with on screen decades later. From an early age, Eva was something of a magnet for dramatic happenings. She and her family had to flee Hungary in the 1930s, forced out as Europe grew more and more unstable. It was a time of unspeakable anxiety for Jewish families, and although the Gabor clan would eventually find their way to safety, their extended family was not so lucky. Grandparents and other relatives stayed behind and ultimately perished in the war, an unspeakably brutal outcome. The Gabors, who made it to the United States, were physically safe, but they carried the weight of that loss for the rest of their days. Even though Eva became known for her comedic roles, her large personality, and her sweet public persona, privately she was marked by these early traumas. As the carefree darling of show business, she rarely spoke of them, preferring to keep Hollywood's spotlight upon her flamboyant anecdotes rather than her heartbreak. That ability to persist with a glamorous smile became one of her trademarks. For Eva, the stage was set very early for romantic entanglements to become as important to her story as her career in film and television. She was first married at just 18 years old to a Swedish osteopath doctor, Eric Drimmer, who had captured her fancy enough that she dove into matrimony with him. And soon after, she dove into a brand new life in the United States. She barely spoke English upon her arrival, but her mother's unwavering drive, along with her own innate charm, landed Eva a contract with Paramount. Now, one might imagine this as the launching pad for a dream come true. But success has a funny way of not traveling in a straight line, and Eva's experiences at Paramount were something of a mixed bag. She had to train, losing the thickest edges of her accent, learning comedic timing, and practicing a more refined, camera-friendly posture. Her earliest film roles included a forgettable production called Forced Landing in 1941, which she would look back on with the scathing comment that it wasn't just a B-movie, maybe it was further down the alphabet. During these years, personal matters also grew messy. Eva discovered fundamental incompatibilities in her marriage to Drimmer. She wanted children. He apparently objected to her becoming pregnant and fulfilling that maternal urge she felt. Then there was the dynamic with the Gabor clan itself. Not long after Eva moved to the U.S., her dazzling, strong-willed middle sister Zaza also migrated and ended up living in the same household. Tensions erupted. Zsa, despised Drimmer, effectively claimed the master bedroom for herself and sowed more friction than a newlywed couple could handle. It all came crashing down in under 5 years. But Eva made a revealing comment years later. Zsa divorced him, not me. She was strong, I was not. It was a statement that indicated the complicated web of her family's involvement in her private life, as if Eva had never been left fully to her own devices to decide what she wanted. I wanted to have babies and lead a simple family life, she explained, but my husband objected to me having children. And yet the reason the union ended had as much to do with her sister's meddling as it did with any personal conflict. Once divorced, Eva would leap into matrimony several more times. One might say her love life was a constant swirl, and she would jokingly declare later on that marriage was simply too interesting, an experiment to be conducted just once or twice. Her second union was to investment broker Charles Isaacs, which lasted a bit longer, about 6 years, but ended all the same. Then came plastic surgeon John Elbert Williams, with whom she stayed married for about half a year, give or take, making him the "I was your third husband" elevator man. Fourth was Richard Brown, a textile manufacturer, to whom she said yes after only 9 months of dating. In fact, they married 2 hours after the proposal on such short notice that neither of her sisters could even make the ceremony. Despite such a hasty, impulsive beginning, that particular marriage lasted nearly 14 years, which by Gabor standards might as well have been a golden anniversary. Finally, she married aerospace executive Frank Jameson, forging on for another decade. After that last divorce, she never remarried, although she did famously have a long relationship with the talk show host and media mogul Merv Griffin, one that came close to walking down the aisle, but never actually did. While her personal life swirled from wedding bells to separation announcements, Eva's Hollywood career gradually found its footing. For many years, her big breakthrough role was elusive. She did small parts in films and some supporting roles in comedic features. Don't Go Near the Water, a 1957 wartime comedy with Glenn Ford, gave her a chance to be that shapely, flirtatious presence who could deliver sassy lines and get the comedic timing just right. Yet it never vaulted her to household name status. Even though the original plan, back when Paramount had hired voice coaches for her, was to develop her into a leading lady, something always seemed to get in the way. Maybe poor script choices, maybe her accent, or maybe the Gabor name simply carried a different kind of baggage. But that changed in 1965, when she joined the rural sitcom Green Acres as Lisa Douglas, a cosmopolitan socialite convinced by her spouse, played by Eddie Albert, to leave the city behind and live on a farm. Green Acres was a hit, and it made Eva truly famous in her own right. People recognized her from a mile away, calling out that trademark accent. The show let her comedic talents shine, especially in the fish-out-of-water scenarios. The writers, actually wanting to account for Eva's accent in the storyline, gave Lisa Douglas a Hungarian backstory, complete with an Army veteran father and 2 sisters, which mirrored Eva's real background in an exaggerated comedic form. Even so, real-life Eva was more of a comedic presence than even the fictional Lisa, often going on talk shows in full glam to banter with hosts and trade sly quips. She was known for an unwavering devotion to glamour. One behind-the-scenes anecdote that circulated widely was that the cow, nicknamed Eleanor, or Eleanor the cow, on set was allergic to Eva's heavy perfume. Whenever she arrived wearing a particular fragrance, the poor animal would lose control of its bowels on the spot. Despite her comedic skill and memorable portrayal, Eva never scored major awards for Green Acres. The only cast member who won any performance accolade was Arnold the pig, recognized as the best performing animal on television at one point. This comedic dynamic caused the rumor that on the last day of filming, the cast had a feast in which they supposedly ate Arnold. Obviously, that was just a bit of dark humor fabricated by a tired cast member wanting to amuse himself and deter persistent fans from asking questions. But it certainly showed how gossip could swirl in the orbit of an already colorfully rumored family. Meanwhile, critics might have dismissed Green Acres as fluff, but for Eva, it was deeply meaningful. It gave her her own piece of the limelight, independent of her more scandalous and headline-grabbing sister, Zsa. She was proud of her comedic performance and delighted to represent a lead role that gave her a regular place in American living rooms. Sadly, Green Acres fell victim to a rural purge in the early 1970s. Network executives, eager to appeal to a younger, more urban demographic, canceled a bunch of shows set in rural environments, even if those programs were still popular and profitable. Green Acres was among the casualties, abruptly concluding Eva's comedic momentum in that format. However, she quickly found a new niche in voice acting for Walt Disney animated films, which was a sphere she seemed born to conquer with that delightful accent. She became the voice of Duchess in the Aristocats, 1970, bringing sophistication and maternal warmth to the elegant white cat at the heart of the story. In 1977, she also began a long-standing role as Miss Bianca in The Rescuers, a classy Hungarian mouse who pairs with Bob Newhart's Bernard for thrilling adventures. That role continued in The Rescuers Down Under, 1990, bridging entire decades of Disney history and endearing Eva's voice to new generations of fans who may never have seen Green Acres. In these roles, her accent, refined comedic timing, and ability to sound nurturing yet spirited turned her into a beloved figure in animated classics. Children growing up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s might never have watched her live-action work, but they adored her voice. That comedic gentleness permeated everything she did in animation. Meanwhile, her sister Zsa was becoming notorious for flamboyant talk show appearances, wild statements, lavish outfits, 9 husbands, and, perhaps most famously, an incident in which she slapped a police officer during a traffic stop in 1989. The media had a field day with that fiasco, and because the sisters looked somewhat alike, both glamorous, Hungarian accented blondes, people sometimes confused them. Eva found herself in the uncomfortable position of frequently having to say, "No, that was Zsa." And indeed, Eva had her own minor brush with the law, a routine traffic infraction. But fortunately, she never slapped an officer. She did find it comedic, though, that the policeman recognized her immediately, despite her friend's attempt to keep Eva hidden, presumably so they wouldn't have to do more than pay a ticket. She joked later that she was just relieved the officer didn't think she was Zsa. This overshadowing effect was something that irked Eva. She was called the nice sister or the other sister, which at times might have been more insulting than flattering. Zsa's flamboyant escapades drew the lion's share of public attention, giving her a certain notoriety that overshadowed Eva's quieter, comedic, or business achievements. Since childhood, they had been pigeonholed. Magda was the smart one, Zsa was the beauty, and Eva was sometimes singled out as the ugly duckling. Albeit one with a big personality, she would laugh off the comparisons in the press but admitted in interviews that it hurt whenever people mistook her for Zsa or treated her as a side note to her older sister's scandal-driven stardom. Eva occasionally delivered witty barbs, such as telling interviewers that she was the first real actress in the family. She even once said, "I'm still the only actress in the family," a nod to Zsa's fame for being famous rather than for any notable screen performance. By the time Eva found success, especially with Green Acres, Zahadza had already become a talk show staple, dropping outrageous one-liners that earned her a permanent place in pop culture. Their relationship was complicated. They claimed to speak every day, but also reportedly engaged in cyclical feuds in which they'd go for a week or more without talking. The family dynamic had always been fraught with competitiveness and maternal pressure from Jolie. Jolie had once written that Magda was so overweight as a child that she was ashamed to be seen with her. Mother Gabor wanted them to be perfect, the best dressed, the most glamorous, living out the showbiz fantasy she never got to fulfill. Naturally, the sisters projected that onto the world. They rarely let themselves be seen disheveled or undone, always wore full makeup, even for something as simple as answering the door. Eva used to say, jokingly, that she despised the rising popularity of the natural look in the 1990s and insisted on maintaining her old-school Hollywood glamour. According to Merv Griffin, she refused to see a dialect coach to smooth her accent. She understood that her Hungarian lilt was part of her brand, a trademark that endeared her to fans, and Merv Griffin himself was a key figure in Eva's later life. Their relationship was a swirl of romance rumors, frequent sightings in public, and talk of possible wedding plans. Gossip columns loved the notion of these two media-savvy figures tying the knot. They evidently did debate marriage, and Nancy Reagan was rumored to be on the short list to serve as matron of honor, but it never happened, with reasons that vary depending on who tells the story. Griffin claimed they couldn't agree on a house to live in, and that Eva was indecisive about which members of her staff she would keep if they moved in together. A more scandalous rumor suggests that Eva was his beard, a term describing a woman who plays the role of a romantic partner to a gay or bisexual man to keep up appearances. While the truth remains uncertain, it's plausible that their affection was genuine and not necessarily romantic in the conventional sense. In her final marital arrangement, her fifth and last husband, Frank Jameson, Eva at least found a semblance of stable day-to-day living for a decade. She helped raise his children, once saying that they loved her more than her own did, only to have Merv Griffin point out with amusement that she didn't have any children of her own. Eva simply responded, "I don't," as if that fact were a mere footnote in her story. She had expressed a desire for motherhood back in her marriage to Dr. Drimmer, but by the time she was older and living that glamorous starlet existence, it seemed she'd made her peace. Some part of her life plan just didn't happen, and maybe that was that. In place of a brood of kids, she had a legion of fans, Hollywood friends, talk show sets, and comedic roles that fed her showbiz soul. One might say her greatest heartbreak was never fully addressed in public, just touched upon gently in interviews. A famous incident took place in 1966 on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, when she convinced Carson to play Twister with her, live on air. The resulting comedic chaos was apparently so funny that Twister, which was about to be taken off the market due to poor sales, soared to popularity. Thanks to Eva's and Carson's entertaining demonstration, Twister became a global phenomenon. While Zisha Zija might have dominated sensational tabloids, Eva had her own brand of mild scandal. Like that time she ended up in a mistaken identity lawsuit story, where a different Eva Gabor was suing a grocery chain after slipping and falling, and everyone assumed it was the actress. She got phone calls from concerned friends and had to laugh it off. "No, darling, that's not me." People might have confused her with Zazija, but they also sometimes confused her with total strangers named Gabor. Not surprising, considering how unusual the name was in American circles at that time. All the while, the Gabor sisters meticulously hid or at least obfuscated their real ages. Hungarian record-keeping in the early 1900s was spotty, So they took advantage of that, and each claimed they were younger than they actually were. They carried this showbiz habit to the grave. Eva's tombstone famously omits any birth date. This coy approach to age was part of the Gabor mystique. They were among the first wave of celebrities famous for being famous. This might remind one of modern personalities like the Kardashian family, who have parlayed public interest in their personal lives into multi-platform empires. The Gabor sisters were the Kardashians of mid-century Hollywood. People watched them because they were entertaining, glamorous, had curious accents, and were embroiled in lively personal dramas. Their names commanded attention in newspapers, on radio shows, and later on television. Eva seemed to genuinely enjoy the flamboyance, though it came packaged with heartbreak and scandal. She shared a story about her dog giving birth to puppies in the late 1960s. The male pup wasn't breathing when it arrived, and she reportedly thrust a little hose down its throat and managed to resuscitate it. She named him Oliver, proud of having saved his life personally. She wasn't just the woman who breezed around wearing perfumed gowns and witty lines. She had a maternal instinct, a caretaker's heart, and a willingness to get her hands dirty if needed. She might not have had children, but she had a huge soft spot for animals. A partial reason she insisted on always having dogs around, even if it meant chaos on set or dog hair in the dressing room. She did keep in sporadic contact with Magda and Jaja, though each sister's personal life was complicated in its own right. Magda was married 6 times, Jaja a remarkable 9. Of all those unions, many ended in scandal, comedic or otherwise. In that competition, Eva was the mildest, with only 5 marriages to her name. And though jokes flew around about the Gabor sisters swallowing men alive or collecting diamonds from each husband, there was undeniably a comedic dimension to it all. Eva herself once half-joked that she considered marriage an important experiment everyone should do at least once or twice or more if you were a Gabor. For all her comedic spirit, life had a tragic final chapter in store for Eva. In her mid-70s, she took a vacation to Mexico. She slipped and fell in the bathtub. The seriousness of this injury is something that might have gone underappreciated at first, but complications quickly arose. She traveled back to Los Angeles feeling unwell, and soon pneumonia set in. On July 4th, 1995, Independence Day, she passed away at the age of 76. She was, ironically, the youngest Gabor sister, and yet the first to die. Her older sisters, Magda and Zaja, would outlive her, each grappling with the knowledge that the sweet comedic baby of the family, the shining star of Green Acres and beloved Disney characters, was gone. Hollywood wept, and fans across America were stunned. For many, especially those from older generations, Eva Gabor was more than just another actress. She was a radiant presence from the golden era of TV sitcoms, an old Hollywood star who had successfully pivoted into new mediums, from color TV to Disney animation. She was also living proof that an ambitious immigrant could achieve a life of glamour in America, even if heartbreak, complicated romances, and hidden grief lurked behind the scenes. In the aftermath of her passing, fans remembered those iconic moments. Her comedic meltdown in the fictional Hooterville on Green Acres, her sultry melodic voice in the Aristocats and The Rescuers, her easy banter on The Tonight Show that saved Twister from the dustbin, and her status as a refined comedic star who seemed eternally glamorous. The Gabor sisters as a trio became part of Hollywood lore. Eva wasn't quite the scandal magnet Zaza was, nor was she overshadowed by Magda's quieter existence. Instead, she carved out her own comedic identity. There was talk about whether she and Merv Griffin might have married eventually. There was speculation about whether her life would have been different if she'd been allowed to have children in that first marriage. But the time for answers had passed. Instead, fans and future generations were left with a legacy of comedic performances and the comfort of that voice in Disney classics, which continue to run around the globe. Long after the black and white talk shows featuring the Gabor sisters slip from popular memory, children will likely still watch the Aristocats or the Rescuers, hear Miss Bianca's accent, and be charmed by Eva's melodic tone, completely unaware of the complicated life story behind that voice. An interesting footnote is that a lot of commentary about Eva and Jaja over the decades tried to frame them as locked in a battle for the spotlight, but there's evidence that behind closed doors, they were each other's best allies at times. Yes, they fought. Yes, they sometimes feuded bitterly. Yes, they had different approaches to love and marriage. Jaja once confessed that she thought Eva was too compliant, too quick to yield, too apt to say yes, darling, when she should have said no. Eva in turn teased Jaja for being too brash, turning their mother's dream of fame into a recurring comedic punchline. Nonetheless, they were connected by shared memories of fleeing Europe, of losing family in the Holocaust, of navigating the disorienting American entertainment scene. It bound them together in ways the outside world might not have fully grasped. Once Eva left the stage, Hollywood changed swiftly. The 1990s ushered in a different era, one where stars were more likely to appear in tabloids for unscrupulous reasons, paparazzi lurking behind every corner. Eva was from a generation that, for all its flaws, still tried to maintain a veneer of class. She left behind a blueprint for forging an identity that's half comedic persona, half society figure, all with an accent that refused to blend in. She was proud of being Hungarian, proud of the heritage that gave her a distinct flair. When Merv Griffin occasionally teased her about seeing a speech coach to neutralize or at least lighten her accent, Eva would famously say, "Darling, it's my whole life. It's my business," implying that this accent was her calling card, something inextricably linked with her brand of comedic glamour. Eva's comedic gifts found new life on various game shows and talk shows. She made cameo appearances and guest spots in other TV series, occasionally playing a variation of herself, glamorous, Hungarian, quick with a witty line, and dressed to the nines. She was a natural at this because it wasn't just an on-screen persona. This was Eva. She refused to answer the door unless her hair and makeup were done. She wore so much perfume that livestock fled in terror. She made self-deprecating jokes about being overshadowed by Jaja, but tried to keep the peace in the family anyway. She was the Gabor with the gentlest heart, the caretaker, the comedic support, the one who genuinely loved her craft rather than just the fame. When she died, her longtime companion Merv Griffin was devastated. He spoke highly of her, praising her comedic instincts and her affectionate nature. It was a heartbreak not just for him, but for the many fans who still remembered her bright-eyed, comedic stylings. The heartbreak extended to older generations who had come to know her as Lisa Douglas, the city girl with a heart big enough to attempt farm living for her husband's dreams. She left no children, no direct line of Gabor heirs in that sense, but she bequeathed an iconic presence to American entertainment that remains surprisingly timeless. You can still tune in to classic TV channels and see Lisa Douglas flouncing around in satin dresses, complaining about farm chores. Or you can stream Disney classics and be enchanted by Duchess or Miss Bianca. Each time that voice purrs a sophisticated darling, you're hearing Eva's spirit, an echo of that Hungarian-born star who found a comedic home in the hearts of